Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those of you who are joining us from across the world today for another edition of Pandemic Punditry brought to you by the Content Experience Company. We are delighted and honored to have with us none other than Sonalie Figueiras, the founder and editor-in-chief of Green Queen Media, Asia's largest award-winning sustainability media platform advocating for social and environmental change using original and inspiring content. Welcome to Pandemic Punditry, Sonalie, and I hope I didn't murder your last name there.
Yeah, somehow the U trips people up. It's easier to pronounce than it looks. But anyway, thank you so much for having me and for that very kind introduction. I'm super excited to be here. I was just thinking how much I love the name Pandemic Punditry. And I was actually thinking, once this kind of pandemic nightmare is over, what are you thinking in terms of the name?
We had that discussion a couple of times. So, we, at some point there's going to be a life to this, and I really hope it is actually the case that the pandemic is in the rearview mirror and not staring at us. So I think I'm hopeful, and I would be happy to change the name and come up with something else as and when that happens, because I can't wait for this to be over as well.
Or you can keep the consonants and just go post-pandemic punditry, right?
I can do that. But that's something that I've been mulling as well. But every time I think we're going to do that, we have some kind of a crazy spike and another wave, and I'm like, oh no. so
it's just the nightmare that never ends in every country.
Unfortunately, it seems like that. Certainly here in Delhi. They just instituted curfew last night. So from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. every night, there's a curfew going on in Delhi right now. Let's see what happens.
My mom can't go back to her house. So she hasn't been back for 2 years. And she was talking to her relative yesterday, and they said, probably you won't be coming the whole year of 2021.
Yeah. It certainly looks like that for some. I mean, there are people coming in and out of to India all the time from all over the place,
it's older and obviously, like, why would now? There's no need for her to travel unless she absolutely has to. But of course, she's desperate to see her family and friends, and nowhere quite like your hometown, right?
Absolutely, I fully agree with that. But yeah, I think the older generation's got to be a little bit more careful given all the risk factors. So So Sonalie, I know that you're a well-known media personality, in the smart protein space. How did that mission for Sort of Good begin? And was there like a catalyst or aha moment that said, I got to do this?
I have a very typical story in that I had my own health issues, which is what led me to understand that the food you eat and the way you live your life has a huge impact on your health, and that you can't just rely on medication. So that's sort of how Green Queen started. But about 5 or 6 years ago, I was really lucky because of my other business, Ekowarehouse, which is an organic sourcing platform. I got to, this was obviously pre-COVID, I got to travel the world, going to a lot of trade shows and food shows, and basically meeting farmers and food entrepreneurs and ingredient specialists and all these kind of incredible people. And of course, I come from a food family. Like, food is for me integral to everything: your health, your life. I definitely think it's a huge part of our identity as humans. So I've always been interested in it, but thanks to my work, I got to see the other side of it: the supply chain and the production and the manufacturing. And that is when I really started to meet companies that you could call them, new food tech, or at the time I wasn't using the word all protein. And it's funny, yesterday on LinkedIn, I shared a really old post, my first post on Green Queen, which was in June 2016, about 8 food tech companies that I said were going to revolutionize our plates. And, that was really, I had no one to talk to about that. I was really on my own, especially in Asia. I don't think anyone had heard of Impossible Foods or Just Egg, or it was used to be called Hampton Creek, or New Wave Foods, the plant-based shrimp. And I think people just thought it sounded insane. And I remember just not feeling very excited because I had met these companies at shows and I had tasted some of their products and I had seen what they were doing. And I had this distinct feeling at those events that the world and the way we eat was about to change, and that we were actually going to have a shot at changing people's minds about reducing meat and animal foods, and that was a really big moment for me. But it was a very private moment.
Right.
And I remember the only person that I had to talk to about it was Jenny from Green Monday.
Okay.
She is David Young's sort of basically co-founder. She came on board, 6 months after he started, and they do everything together. She does a lot of the operation work and the launch work, and I'm very lucky to call her a mentor. And she was always at those shows along with me, and we were often the only people from Hong Kong at these shows. And we were both just like me. She's a bit of a product kind of geek. She loves like the innovation of products, and that's what led them to eventually develop their own food tech arm, Omni Foods and Omni Pork, Omni Meat. But we would kind of meet up in Hong Kong and we would have coffee and we'd just be like, did you see this product? And did you see this one? Can you believe this one? And what do you think of this one? And we'd say, oh, I didn't think that was good enough. And I thought this was really good. And this cheese. And that's really how we developed this kind of really close friendship, because we really had no one to talk to about all this stuff, because it was just really nascent here. It was really the beginning, and even across Asia, and even across my network in Europe. I'm half French, or in India, I'm half Indian. I went to school in the US. I lived in London. Like I have people all over that I can talk to, but no one kind of, it wasn't a thing. There wasn't even the world new protein or a smart protein, alt protein. This hadn't even become a term. And so that was really an awakening for me, the second awakening after the awakening, which was in 2007, where I really started going down a rabbit hole of research based on my chronic health issues and realized that everything I was eating was wrong for my health and that I needed to rethink everything. And this is from someone who grew up with homemade food. My mom, Punjabi mommy, right? She's like an amazing cook. My nani was an amazing cook, rest her soul. She really was famous in Delhi actually for her table, for her food. And so I didn't grow up eating, so-called processed food or, TV dinners or takeaway. I mean, my mom would say, oh, you want a cookie? I'll make it from scratch. It was typical Punjabi mummy, as you know. And the idea for me, I had grown up with this idea that, if it was homemade, it was good and it was healthy and it was, safe. And so to grow up and realize that my mom, who is a phenomenal cook and had tried so hard to give me, the best food in the world, had been duped by the industry into buying products that were filled with antibiotics and hormones and synthetic additives, which she didn't even know about because no one was talking about it, and that those things could have made me sick and led me to have these, chronic, forever hormone diseases that I still live with. That was really shocking, right? Yeah. Because that's not even that my mom wasn't trying or doing everything that you could expect a mom to do.
Right.
So that was the realization number one, and that's how I ended up starting Green Queen, as a way to share resources with people in Hong Kong who wanted to live a greener and healthier life. And then 5 years later is when the big kind of shift happened for me with to do with kind of the connection between our plate and carbon emissions, and the idea that there were these companies that were thinking big. Yeah. And the article that I'm talking about, I profiled Impossible Foods, Beyond Meat. This is before Impossible Foods had come to market. This is before Beyond Meat had launched the Beyond Burger, which kind of changed the course of their company.
Right.
There was Hampton Creek, which is now Eat Just, which has obviously made history on so many levels. There's New Harvest and Memphis Meats, who were advancing the cause of cellular agriculture. There's the Not Co. in Chile that was using algorithms. These are all the companies in this article. And I just happened to reread this article yesterday because we were doing a piece on New Wave Foods, who was also in the article. And they are, of course, the female-founded awesome company that is doing plant-based shrimp made from algae and plant-based seafood. And to me, that was really revolutionary because I actually quit eating shrimp and prawns many years before I quit meat. I quit because of the Guardian investigation into the slavery that is rampant in shrimp and prawn farming, which has now been detailed in Seaspiracy, but which many of us have known about for a decade or more. And so I had quit that, and I was thinking, oh, here's someone who's coming up with something that is really awesome. The potential for me to eat shrimp again. And so yesterday when New Wave Foods has just closed a big round of funding in January and now has just launched nationwide across food service in the United States. And that's why I was looking for the original article where I mentioned them. And that's when I found this article from 5 years ago, which was really our first alt protein article. And it's just incredible to see that every single company and organization on that article is now a major leader in the space. It's $1 billion story on each one.
I know, and if they were, some of them are publicly listed now, but if you were able to buy stock, you've been really well off by now. So on those very sort of visionary sort of picks that you had that early on, that's amazing. So
none of these were open.
I know exactly, right?
My mom says that all the time. She said, "Why did you not buy Beyond Meat stock?" I was sorry, Mom, I wasn't invited to.
Exactly. That's so maybe the next 10 that you pick, will probably have a different impact, right? So it's amazing. I think there are some parallels with your story. I did also become a vegan for health reasons as well in 2014. Wow. So it saved my life when I switched. So I think definitely, a lot of people do switch for those reasons because they are compelling enough on their own. But of course, becoming an ethical vegan and sort of getting rid of all the other stuff happens subsequently, I think downstream. But the other sort of interesting parallel is that I'm a Sri Lankan, and we have the same kind of obsession with food. I remember somebody commenting that you guys are crazy because you have this huge breakfast that could, last, the entire day. And as soon as you're done, the next question is, hey, what are we having for lunch?
That's my family chat. My mom was like, okay, I'm making this today. What are you doing? I'm like, Mom, I tried this recipe. What are we, my mom has her own cookbook. We only talk in food, and, this is a Punjabi thing, but also just a general mom and a general Desi thing in the subcontinent. You show love through food.
Yes.
The idea for my mom to give me something pre-prepared, that's like shame on her, Right. So actually it's been really interesting to go on this journey. We're obviously very close, right. Mummy and me, but go on this journey with her where she's had to, and she's been so great, but she's had to really unlearn so much stuff because she did come from a different generation, and she's not somebody who eats a lot of meat naturally, but of course meat represented, wealth and status, and just also nutrition.
Yes.
My mom was born, right after the war, the Second World War. India was a very different country when she was born. And, it is this kind of different kind of value system and tradition and heritage and understanding about food. And of course, there was no Google when she was, you weren't kind of going, what's in my food? Now, of course, we have so much access, probably too much access to information, so we can make these decisions. But it's just been interesting going on that journey. And also I have a son, and He's plant-based. And my mom was super respectful of that decision, and now is the best vegan baker in the world because she wants to make treats for her little Bubba, right?
Right.
So,
So it's amazing how many people have to sort of, I'm a foodie. I love to cook, and I find it a lot more challenging to cook vegetarian or vegan food because, frankly, that's more challenging. I mean, doing a leg of lamb seemed so much easier in comparison to sort of doing a really good eggplant dish that people will have as their main course and not as a side dish. I think that's that's always a great challenge. So Sonalie, today a lot of people I know rely on your content to find out what's exciting and dynamic in this new smart protein space. I mean, they sort of rely on this the world over to find out what's happening. So what are some of the early challenges that you faced or you continue to face maybe when you first, I think you started like 9 years ago or something like that. What were some of those early challenges and do some of those still persist? And what are some sort of, life or career lessons that you learned that you can pass on maybe to our audience?
Absolutely. That's such a good question. And I think with Green Queen, we've had different lives and different phases. So we were originally more of kind of a guide to living green, and then in Hong Kong.
Okay.
And then later we transitioned to being more of an Asia sustainability platform. And I would say in the last 18 months, we've really come into our own as a global force of alternative protein and sustainability news. And we've gone much more news than sort of lifestyle guides, because that's really where my passion lies for. Okay. I'm a news junkie. I read a lot of news. Read, not watch. I'm still a reader. I'm very old-fashioned. And I wanted a place to put all the headlines that I wish I could read or that I thought were worth amplifying. And at Green Queen, we play, on one hand, we have a role of reporting the news in our different verticals, right? But we also play a role where we often will give, especially for Asian founders and companies, their first article or their first kind of coverage in order to get their story out. And then it might get picked up by other bigger outlets. And that's sort of a role I take very seriously, that we're in that kind of media food chain where we help to get the story out, and then it will get picked up and amplified. And it's been so great to see people that we covered 18 months ago or a year ago, and now they're really getting to the mainstream, and that's wonderful. I'm super happy for that. Challenges wise, well, it's been a challenge being a woman in media. I would say in the beginning, and especially in the beginning when we had more lifestyle content, we were often kind of dismissed in a business sense as, it's just some blog. I actually now hate the word blog as a result. And I get a little bit upset when people call us a blog, because we are obviously not a blog. It is not my private opinions and me just spouting off. But it does seem like there is this kind of diminutive language around women who own blogs or media companies in sustainability. Not to mention that today sustainability and all-protein are the hottest topics du jour, but 5 years ago, 10 years ago, they were very much considered, silly side thing that, does anyone really care? I mean, I still remember this guy, this friend of my husband's, of course, saying to me, "Really? Green? Really? You think that's gonna work?"
Oh, man.
And it's very funny because now he wants to start a green business, but that's a different story. But there was a lot of dismissing that, and that was a little bit difficult for me, because I did come from a very, let's say, highly competitive industry. I worked in management consulting. I worked in big insurance. I worked in finance, and I was used to kind of, and I say this very openly, like I was used to having a certain kind of, I guess, cachet to my job. And then to go from that to doing what I was doing and having everyone just think it was silly or useless. Now the same people think that I was really smart, but that's taken 10 years, and so that, it's not that I care from an ego point of view, it's that I care because it made me doubt myself. It made me think, am I crazy? And like, what am I doing? And it took, the biggest challenge of this journey was to stay on the journey and stay committed to my vision, which today feels very good and like has come to fruition. But there were many days where it felt that everybody else was moving on and everybody else was, their careers were progressing. I'm in my 30s, so that's when you see all your peers kind of, big jobs at Facebook and Amazon and this and that. And you're sitting there going, am I insane? But the reality is that the calling was there, the commitment in my heart and my head was there. And so there was no chance of me getting off the train. But sometimes I did wonder, where is this train going?
So a piece of advice there would be stick to your vision and your goal and ambition.
I mean, if you see that there's light in front of you, I mean, don't stick to it just to be stubborn.
Right.
But I felt I had huge convictions about this space and this industry. And I also had a deep, deep, deep conviction about being a voice in Asia, where, this stuff wasn't talked about as much and there wasn't enough of an Asia-based perspective. And I do think you need to be somewhere to have that perspective. And it does sometimes feel like US media headlines and US companies will dominate the world, and to a lesser extent, European and UK, but and Australian. But I think we really needed an Asian voice, especially given that Asia represents, 60% of the world's population and all the consumers and all the growth and all the young people and all the curves on meat consumption and energy usage, they're all happening here. So how can we not have stories here? But that was another challenge, just from a Google point of view and a media point of view, is being based in Hong Kong and being based in Asia and having not always being able to easily rank, at a global level. We always ranked super well in Asia and in Hong Kong and in Singapore, but we had more trouble ranking globally until recently. And then in the last 18 months, it's been completely different. And we definitely rank globally, and that's become less of an issue. But it's also, as I think you cement your position over many years, and Google does reward you for long time commitment. That's really there, because we don't pay for traffic; it's all organic. So it has to, it has to be good, and that's I think my third piece of advice is, do quality work and do work that is your own. And I had a very specific vision as a content person, as the content strategist for Green Queen and the editor-in-chief. I wanted a certain voice, a certain type of format, a certain commitment to data and facts and research and context that I didn't always see in other outlets. And that was also a gamble, because it is sometimes easier to go for the low-hanging clickbait. Right. But I couldn't stand behind that.
Yeah, I think that authenticity, integrity, all of those things really matter when you're in this business. But you're right. I mean, the temptation and what some people seem to be doing a lot of is clickbait. It's going for the clicks, going for the views, and I think it's a long game, and you've proven that to be true, right? I mean, this is for a longer term thing, not something you could have kind of ginned up in 6 months and become number one, right? So and that's definitely shows. So let's talk about something I think is like in the headlines around the world, which is this Netflix documentary by Ali Tibrizi on Seaspiracy, right? I mean, amazing documentary. So, and I loved your take on it, by the way, Sonalie. So do you believe that Seaspiracy will have the same impact that maybe Game Changers and What the Health and Cowspiracy had on people's dietary preferences?
I hope so. But from what I can see, based on all the backlash and the discussions around it and discussions that I'm having offline and in my WhatsApp and at events, or it seems like somehow this is more personal to people. There's something that feels different compared to a Cowspiracy and a Game Changers, where there were definitely critiques, and there were definitely people that didn't buy what the movies were selling, but in terms of the message. But it felt like it was very much like, oh, well, that's just a pro-vegan movie, so let's move on. But here, you really seem to have this huge backlash about, fishing. And it transpires that, I think it's because the fishing industry is the largest in the world. It has the most subsidies. It affects the most number of people. More people eat seafood protein, I think, than almost anything else. I believe, if not eggs.
Right.
So it feels more personal, and it feels like people are feeling very attacked, and maybe their family histories, or maybe they love fishing at the weekend or something. And it just, and for so long we've been told that, meat, it's a guilty pleasure, but it's not that healthy, whereas seafood is super healthy. So there's also that. And I see a lot of discussions in like nutrition and wellness groups where they're saying, well, I thought fish was healthy, so now should I not eat fish? And how does that work? And, these are people who are not necessarily vegan, but who didn't consume red meat for health reasons.
Right.
So I do sense a little bit of a difference there for me. It feels like it's not as much of a, oh, well, that's just a vegan film and moving on. It feels like, hey, wait a minute. I think people feel a lot more ownership over the ocean than they do over they
like a farm or a factory farm or something like that, right?
Exactly.
And I think maybe the fact is that I think that's a really key point that you're making. That I think people. I mean, everybody goes to the beach or likes going to the beach or plays in the water or has some, positive experiences or memories associated with the ocean, right? I mean, we have an idyllic sort of thing in our head about what the farm looks like, right? But many people don't really visit farms for recreation or for a break. Everybody heads to the beach. And I think the fact that, you say that thing that you really love is in danger. I think, people have, and then the food that you're eating is the main cause of that danger. I think that probably is behind this rather visceral reaction maybe people are having, because now they're guilty by association, and that stings, literally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's just a different, it feels like a different reaction than with just beef. And then of course there's all the researchers and scientists and fishery people and NGOs that are, pro sustainable fishing. And of course there's a much bigger debate here about compared to, in my opinion, cowspiracy and maybe what the health and all of that, because I think there is a lot of data about emissions from livestock, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was a harder one to push back on. Okay. Right. I mean, people tried, but it didn't work. And then, the UN made their first report on that in 2006. So by the time Game Changers came out and Cowspiracy and all of this, these had been well covered, well documented. Mm-hmm. Now, sustainable fishing is definitely not in the same position as a topic. And it's definitely full of controversy on both sides, in the sense that, there are people that really don't agree that it's possible and think it's a myth. And there are people that, really strongly disagree and believe that sustainable fishing is a key part of ocean preservation and conservation. So this is not as clear cut. And so this is also why I think there's going to be continue to be a huge fallout. At the end of the day, though, the movie is getting people talking. It's getting people thinking. It's been a long time coming that we need to think about the season a different way. So I think these are all good things. And people are of course free to conclude however they will, and make their own views and make up their own minds. And one of the things we said in our follow-up article, where we kind of listed all the different responses from all the NGOs that were presented in the film, mm-hmm. Is at one point we said, if the movie doesn't speak to you, sure, make up your own mind. Just make sure that you're making up your own mind, and that you're not absorbing an agenda on either side.
Yeah.
Because everyone points out that Ali Tabrisi is a vegan and he has a vegan agenda. Okay,
Yeah.
sure. But are you telling me that the people who are critiquing the movie don't have an agenda? I don't buy it.
No,
So
I agree.
for me, you know, and that's always been my view on everything, is everyone's got an agenda.
Right. And some people are more explicit about it, and others actually hide behind something else, right? Which is what the movie was also showing, right? I mean, some people's agendas are very sort of, open, and others, sort of have a veneer trying to pretend that they are actually organizations that are trying to conserve the oceans, when in fact they are mouthpiece or a front for the fishing industry, right? So it's interesting. I think your article was spot on the response there. It's interesting. One observation I had just watching the movie was, I think we sort of see the ocean as sort of, like a large farm where we go in and we harvest the fish. But it's actually the real analogy is it's actually poaching on grand scale, right? Because it's a wild environment, and we just go in there and we just grab everything. I mean, if somebody went to a national park and like killed all the deer and the lions and tigers and everything else, and then brought that home and then had only the deer or something like that, we'd be like, that's appalling. We should stop that, right? But in the ocean, it seems fair game that you could just go in there and troll, the bottom troll the whole thing, catch all these bycatch, kill the dolphins in the process or whatever else, and we call that harvesting and sustainable. I think that's ridiculous. I think that this commercial large scale, I mean, it's not the small fisherman on a little wooden boat trying to eke a few protein calories by catching a handful of fish for themselves and maybe for sale. These are these huge factory fishing outfits.
Well, exactly. The idea that now I was saying this to my partner today. We were having a discussion about the movie because he also had some discussions over the week, just going, oh, well, what's wrong with a little bit of fishing? And I mean, I think the idea that the movie is trying to attack fishermen communities that, are fishing for their livelihood is a bit of a stretch. If anything, the movie's doing the opposite. It's showing you the plight of the Somali pirates and how they started out as fishermen who were completely, overtaken by illegal fishing by large nations, doing naughty things. And the other thing is, what about the rest of the issues? I see very little in the press about the slavery, right? And the criminality of the industry and the subsidizing that is going on. Yeah. I mean, once again, the arguments seem very narrow and focused on one part of a much bigger can of worms that Tabrisi has, put out there. But of course, no one wants to talk about how the shrimp they're eating was, harvested by a slave.
Exactly.
So it's a little bit disheartening on that side of things. What about the health concerns? I mean, most fish is now coming up. Most samples of fish is coming out with microplastics in them, and not to mention the heavy metal issues and all of that. So I don't understand, sometimes the discussions, and I think they are a distraction, which is to be expected.
But it should be very good for these smart protein companies that are providing alternatives and for seafood, right? I mean, it should become a fertile ground for more people to enter that. So in that sense, I hope that's a silver lining, that more entrepreneurs want to tackle the problem and join the rest of the companies that are doing similar stuff in the space, and or investors to come and actually fund some of those companies generously. So maybe there's a silver lining there in this movie.
Absolutely. And I think that what's been really good is there's been a lot more of a focus on plant-based seafood options, which I had been wondering, and other people in the industry as well, why wasn't there as much of a discussion and as much on seafood alternatives rather than meat and dairy, which seems to get a lot of the headlines and the fun help spur things on. And I think, if anything, what it's made a lot of people realize, whether you agree or not about sustainable fishing and eating fish, is that there is a very, very, very large amount of fish consumed in the world. And
Yeah.
we definitely need to start thinking about more alternatives. So yes, if this spurs on a whole new generation of funders and entrepreneurs and consumers in that space, I think it would have been a boon.
Exactly, and I think that'll happen. So let's keep our fingers crossed as sort of advocates for alternatives. So Sunny, what are some of the okay? So let's switch gears a little bit from the movie, and so what are some of the trends that you're seeing, that are exciting in the smart protein space lately? I know you're quite keyed into a lot of the stuff that's going on. In your personal opinion, what are some of the more exciting things that have happened in the
I
last
think
6 months?
there's what I personally find exciting, and then there's also like what's really happening in the bigger space. And so
Yeah.
I think what's really exciting is that we're entering a new phase for the industry, and so the fundamentals are being looked at more. And so it can cover all kinds of things, but we're getting a lot more emphasis on things like your packaging also needs to be sustainable, not just your product.
Yes.
So that's exciting. There clearly is a move towards, and I don't love this term, but it's the term that people understand. So the cleaner label. So, people like Ura kind of getting their ingredient list down to 5 things and using olive oil and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's part well.
Yep.
Then you've got, I think for me, I've been very concerned about there not being enough supply and scalability potential. So not enough co-packers and co-manufacturers. And I'm seeing suddenly this year a lot more movement there, a lot more investment in plants and factories and kind of space to produce, because demand is great. And we have so many, downstream, we have loads of brands, but where are they going to make their stuff if we are to, really keep going on this trend to take a bigger chunk out of, the meat shelves, the animal meat shelves and the dairy shelves, etc. So I'm excited about that. I've also started to see what I talked about in my trend report earlier this year. I think, I called it the revenge of big dairy and big meat. And I think that it's coming. I think that, for a long time, the industry insiders were happy to just let us do our thing and whatever. We didn't really matter. But now market share is being grabbed and consumers are, showing that they are repeat customers and that plant-based foods are a part of their grocery basket. And that is going to come at the cost of meat and dairy and seafood. And that means that those people representing those interests are going to get angry. And they're going to want to get even, and they're going to want to fight back. And so I think we're going to see a lot more of that, a lot more fighting back. Also, the industry as a whole is more mature. So one of the things we talk about a lot on our Clubhouse weekly new food media show is we're going to need a lot more supporting services. So kind of, designers, content creators, educators, awareness builders, just ecosystem players, because as more and more of these options end up on shelves, consumers need more help in terms of understanding, what are these products and how to cook them and what are their nutrition values and all of that. And so there's this whole kind of like, even things like recruiters, like conscious recruiters and from legal services and just all kinds of things. I think a lot more plant-based companies are going to have lobbyists on their team or on retainer. And it's just all of this kind of complementary secondary level services that are going to need to help bulwark the industry as it continues to mature.
Right. No, that's spot on. I think that's a really good point. I think all of these things are sort of a sign of maturity and growth, right? So and it's a global phenomenon, right? I mean, it was initially sort of you needed food techs and all this kind of stuff, but it's now lawyers, it's graphic designers, it's packaging experts, it's process people, it's everything, right? Because as these companies scale and grow and other companies sort of come behind them, there is more and more demand for exactly those things that you just mentioned. So yeah, that's definitely I agree with that trend analysis there for sure. What are some things that you're seeing that you're probably not so keen on? Are there anything like that in the space that you're looking at and going,
I'm
not, not,
really not a big fan of the hybrid meat and plant-based stuff.
oh yeah, the combination ones.
Yeah. I'm a fan of hybrid as it relates to plant-based and fermented, or plant-based and cell-based. I think there's a lot of fantastic stuff going on there. And for me, I wish hybrid was the word we would use for that. But there are still persistent trials of kind of, animal meat and plant-based meat. And I'm not a huge fan of that.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
What else? There's not that much. Okay, there is a small thing that I'm not a big fan of, and it's unfortunately something that I was worried was going to happen, and I am starting to see more and more. I wish it weren't the case, but I'm starting to see a lot more kind of factions building within the movement. So kind of separation of different camps, instead of, at one point, we felt like it was us against the world. So everybody was sort of, we're in this together. And I'm seeing a lot more kind of, oh, well, I don't agree with this, and this organization doesn't represent what I do, and blah, blah, blah. And so that is going to happen. That's too bad, because I think that obviously is going to separate us and divide us and make us weaker. But it's also to be expected. The bigger you get, the more different interests and different values and different voices want to have their own space and their own loudspeaker, and they may not want to share the soapbox.
Yeah.
I'm seeing this across NGOs, lobby groups, media companies, and even among startups, investors, at all levels. I'm seeing it. I'm seeing this kind of, we're better than them, or we do this differently, or we stand for these values, and that's a shame. But I'm not sure if us humans can really. I don't know if
rise above that.
I don't know if we can. Exactly. Exactly. I don't know if we can. I think that may be one of just the defining characteristics of being a human.
And one way to look at it is that it is a sign of growth, right? So when you're small, you can afford to be sort of like kumbaya about stuff, right? But, but as you kind of become billion-dollar companies, and you have another billion-dollar company that's in the same sort of space, then it's not about rising tides raising all boats. It's more like, hey, that can be an anchor, So I think that sort of mentality sets in, unfortunately, right? I mean, it's interesting. I think I think the latest GFI numbers were like 1.4% of the meat market last year was plant-based alternative meats. Dairy was 15%. That's a big staggering number. So that explains why Amul, for example, here in India ran full-page ads in newspapers talking about how bad soy milk and other alternative milks are for you from a health perspective. They took out full-page ads, right? So, and they're working with the regulator to stop using words like milk or cheese or butter or words that sound like it and everything, right? Also, this thing you predicted is already happening here in India.
Right. So this is going to be a huge fight. And I would say this is the perfect way to kind of end our chat, the last bit of our chat. And this is about what are we going to call stuff? And this is just a massive debate, right? I mean, you've got different people. I know a lot of people, for example, in recombinant proteins, fermentation space, they're kind of trying to figure out what's their word, Are they fermentation based? Are they precision fermentation? Are they recombinant? Does anyone in the mass consumer arena even understand what those things mean? Like, what is that? I was having a big debate. There was a big debate in the Hong Kong vegan group today yesterday, I think, about whether ice cream made using perfect day technology should be labeled vegan, with some people saying, well, it's not actually from an animal, and it avoids animal exploitation, so yes, it should be vegan. Whereas there was a whole other faction that was saying, no, it should not be vegan because it is, it's the DNA is structurally identical to animal protein, and it's dairy, and dairy should never be vegan, even if it doesn't come from the animal. So these are the kind of discussions that we're seeing already. Then there's all the discussions around, labeling, especially in Europe and in the US, like where people, the lobbyists are fighting like meat and dairy and shapes of containers and all of this. I personally feel like those people are on the wrong side of history.
Yes,
And
no question.
in about 5 to 10 years, that's going to be irrelevant just because
Yeah.
market shares are going to get bigger and the environmental concerns are going to get so urgent that regulation will come on our side.
Yes.
But again, that will take a while, and
Right,
it will
yeah.
cost billions of dollars in legal fees. Lawyers will get rich.
Right.
But meanwhile, activists have to continue to fly the flag.
Mm-hmm.
And in the meantime, companies still have to abide by regulation. And so, for example, in the EU, you can't say milk or yogurt or cheese if you're plant-based. So this is a huge part of the conversation, and it's nowhere near finalized. So it's one, what are the terms? 2, do consumers even understand the terms, right? And do you need different terms in different geographies? Yes. In some languages, there are no words for vegan. Vegan then means different things to different people.
Right.
Some people, vegan means, is a very alienating term that, they don't want to be associated with. For some people, it also is much more, and not for some people, it is much more than food, right? So it's not just about food. And then the word plant-based, the other problem with that is, does it mean based on plants or does it mean 100% plants?
Right.
And then is fermentation part of that? And should mushrooms, I was reading a really interesting, or listening to someone talk about mushrooms and mycelium protein. Is that a plant? No, not really. Botanically, mushrooms are their own categorization. It's fungi, right?
Right.
They're not plants. So there's this whole, are we going to start saying fungi based? So it's, one, it's, everything's so new, we don't know what to call it, and even in, for example, the cell-based space, there's huge, movements to call it cell cultivated or cultured meat or cultivated meat or cell-based meat. One thing's for sure, nobody in the industry wants to say lab grown, which I think is good.
Or synthetic, like Bill Gates did.
Right, or synthetic, okay, or artificial, right? There's terms that are being, so again, but are we going to be able to control that? Yeah. I mean, language is something that's alive, and people are going to say what they want to say. Yeah. And maybe to us, lab grown is negative. To someone else, it's not as negative. It's just descriptive. So just, there's going to be the marketer's job. Again, going back to complementary services that need to happen in order to support the growth of these industries. There's going to be the lobbyist's job to fight regulation, right? That seems silly, like not being able to call, almond milk when we've been calling peanut butter forever, and soya milk forever. I mean, what's the difference?
And it's not like consumers are actually confused. That's the argument that people are making. But I think consumers can pretty much make up their mind. If you say something's not chicken, it's not chicken, all right, or whatever, right? I mean, it's plant-based. I think most of these industry guys are trying to make it sound like the consumer is dumb, right? I mean, there may be a small section of consumers that are oblivious, but by and large, people know what milk is and what not milk is, right? I mean, if it's a substitute, they know it's a substitute, right? And usually the labeling is pretty explicit.
No, but I tend to have a high opinion of people, which is why we don't dumb down our content. That's one of my arguments against clickbait and reductive media, which is why are we acting like people can't read and don't understand things? We're constantly being told, oh, people have no attention span, people don't want to know this, they just want black or white answers. I don't know if that's true. No. Maybe for some people that are busy, but our core readers come to us because they like the quality, they like the context, they like the depth, they like the data. And I think we need to continue to speak to people on a level that is reflective of people's intelligence and ability to make decisions. Right. And we have to stop infantilizing consumers.
Exactly, spot on. Yeah. And I think there's the comment on our chat here that said, maybe we shouldn't think of these things in a functional way, that it's a thing, right? Maybe the category needs to sort of broaden and be more value based, right? So we're talking about foods that do X and Y as opposed to foods that are chicken or beef or eggs or whatever, right? So that's one way to sort of think the problem in a different sort of lens. So I think that's a good comment. So Sonalie, thank you so much for taking the time from, I know what you have very busy days. Thank you for spending the time with us.
Who doesn't? Everybody.
but I know you're the green queen. You're all around the place, running around, putting out great content. And I know you do that, almost single-handedly with a very small staff.
No, I absolutely don't. Yes, our team is very small, but they are the heroes here. Sally, Tanuvi, and Anna, Aigul, Alessandra, and Nicola. They are just such a dream team. I'm so lucky that they all kind of showed up to help amplify the Green Queen mission. I am merely like at the back.
And if there is anybody who's listening who's not subscribed to your newsletter, they should do that. So definitely, get updated with Green Queen on a almost daily basis. So I think you need to do that if you're listening and haven't consumed this content as often as I do. So thanks again, Sonalie, for being such a wonderful guest on Pandemic Punditry. And I do hope the name change is warranted at some point in our future. So that means that we can travel and I can come visit you in Hong Kong, and your mother and you can come visit Delhi.
No, but what you can promise me is that when my mom comes to Delhi, you'll come and have khana with her. Okay, she's got fantastic food in Delhi, so you come and have some food.
I'll be more than happy to do that, so long as it's a plant-based vegan. So I'll be happy to do that. Of course.
It's been an absolute pleasure, love. Thank you. And thank you to Kartiga, by the way. I've just been loving her essays lately.
Oh, she'd be thrilled to hear that. Yeah. So what's happening is that we're getting so busy and we have so much guests. Actually, this week I have 3 live shows. And so we're trying to, we're going to split duties a little bit, and she's going to do some more stuff on impact on a podcast, and I'm going to do the video stuff. So we're still working through the all of that. But it's just that, we've been sort of too successful. We got so many things we want to talk about because we're talking about planetary impact from multiple sides. I'm going to focus more on the sort of on the diet side, and then she's going to take more of the other impact stuff. So we're trying to figure that out because we're just running ragged here. So
amazing. It's wonderful to watch you guys just go from strength to strength, and everyone on your show, which is wonderful. No,
Thank you.
That's great to hear.
Thank you for being such a voice for good, Sonalie. And wherever we can, let's collaborate. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thank you so much. Bye.
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 Bye.